Good day, YouTube. Today's recording is going to focus on something new that we've been working with Red Hat, specifically coming in OpenShift 4.12. And this is a change that we've been looking at for quite some time, specifically with improving the usability of container ingress services, CIS, Big IP, working with OpenShift. And so, I've been working with a lot of OpenShift deployments for the last 5-6 years with integration of CNI. And to be really honest with you, making things simple is kind of the way that I think things need to move forward. So as you know, the move of OpenShift SDN to OpenShift Kubernetes being supported by the community, it's kind of the proven adopted fact that Red Hat is going to move to OVN-Kubernetes. And I heard, and you might want to check with the OpenShift PM, but I heard that OVN-Kubernetes will become default by OCP 4.12. And so what we've started to do is work with Red Hat to find a solution to work with OVN-Kubernetes without using hybrid. Hybrid is extending VXLAN tunneling to outside the cluster. But I believe hybrid was just built for one of the telco customers, and potentially the annotations could be going. So moving away from OVN-Kubernetes hybrid is really the way that we want to go. And to come and to simplify OVN-Kubernetes with F5 Big IP and CIS is ultimately kind of what we want to do. And so here's a new deployment, a new model for supporting OpenShift OVN-Kubernetes with Big IP, requiring no tunnels. So that's like no VXLAN tunnels, no Genève tunnels. If you're still going between the cluster or within the cluster, you're going to use Genève. But what Big IP is doing is ultimately just routing. And so what it's doing is it's actually routing to what we call this routing external gateway. It's actually routing to a gateway on the worker nodes. And then what actually happens is that gateway, which is probably most likely HA proxy, I believe, or it's some type of router, that device or that gateway is able to forward the traffic to the pod. So Big IP has access, or Big IP has a route to the pod, and therefore Big IP can just route to the pods or wherever the pods are located. And so this is probably the first architecture that is in the line of what we call multi-cluster, right? So our goal is to get to multi-cluster, where Big IP can route to any pod, potentially with any cluster, right? So it's coming, working on some prototypes. If you'd love to have a conversation with me, drop a response in this YouTube channel or send me an email, and we can talk a little bit about some of what we're doing. So this document is focused on standalone. I have tested HA and it's working. Requires a single change, but this video is going to be just first focused on standalone, and then the second video is going to be focused on HA. So this document demonstrates how to use OVN-Kubernetes with F5 Big IP routes to ingress traffic without using an overlay. So an overlay meaning without using flannel. I've tested here with a single cluster. It's OpenShift 4.11, so it's the latest version of OpenShift. And again, this is just standalone. Using OVN-Kubernetes, right, with F5 Big IP routes, so removes the complexity of having to create VXLAN tunnels or using Calico. So I'm not saying that, using flannel is wrong. There's nothing wrong. Flannel is great. I mean, it works fine. It's supported. We've been using flannel for the last 5 years. I've tested with flannel. However, it requires the setup of VXLAN tunnels, right? So if you have a firewall, you've got to open the firewall. You have to create your host subnets, and then in OVN-Kubernetes, you can only create OVN-Kubernetes hybrid if you're using VXLAN tunnels, because there's no Genève support for outside the cluster. So that's why you see this with no tunnels. So again, this documentation is for standalone. HA is coming. It's very simple. You just change one address. You just basically change the floating address. Here, this cluster is a 3-node master cluster and a 3-worker node cluster, basically the defaults. I have an application, a very simple app that is in a project or namespace cafe. So that's what's important, because that's where you need to add the annotation for the return traffic or the external traffic. And so without the annotation, the OpenShift routing gateway has no way of passing it back. And so, because it's routing, right? So think of it as an external route or default gateway to get back to the big IP. And so I'd love for you folks to test this. This repo has pretty much everything you need. What's the biggest thing, the biggest difference here? No CNI, just very, very simple. So let's go through this. So to deploy OpenShift using OVN-Kubernetes, currently you have to change the network type as OVN-Kubernetes. You can change this in your install config file before you create your manifest. Now, as of 4.11, OVN-Kubernetes is not default. OpenShift SDN is default. But I think that 4.12, OVN-Kubernetes is going to be default. It makes sense. However, I did not test with 4.12. I'm waiting 1 more month. Our validation for 4.12 is probably going to start maybe early December. So what you have to do first is verify these gateway nodes. Gateway nodes must be shared, right? So by default, you don't have to do anything. Just verify that your gateway mode is shared, right? So I didn't change anything. It's all default. But to verify that this gateway mode is shared, that means that we can access it. You can actually just use this log. So OC log, one of the worker nodes, that's the OVN-Kubernetes node, the specific namespace, and then I just grabbed on this gateway mode flags. I got this from Red Hat. I'm not making this up. You can see right here that it's shared. So checkbox, right? By default, just check it. If it's not shared, it's probably not going to work. Again, this information comes directly out of Red Hat engineering. We're just following their guidelines to get this working. So just check that's important. And the reason why is because I need to pull the networks from all of the nodes where your pods are going to be located. So to do that, I got to create static routes, because ultimately we're routing here. That's really all it is. So if you're a big IP administrator and you want to create the static routes, you need to get some information from the OpenShift cluster, because ultimately you need to get the pod network. So it's very simple. So what we're going to do is we're going to describe the node. So these are my 3 nodes, my 3 worker nodes. And in my instance here, I'm only putting pods on the worker nodes. So to be honest, I'm not connecting. Big IP is not going to send traffic to the master nodes. So therefore, I don't need routes to the master node. But if you've got controller nodes, and if you're running Big IP on one of those controller nodes, if you're running CIS on the controller nodes, then you would need to annotate that. Or you would need to add a static route, I should say. So here in my case, it's OC described node. The name of the node, I started with SG first. And I'm grabbing, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the node subnet. I'm looking for the node primary IP address. So the primary IP address of the node. Now, this is probably, I'm using IPI, right, infrastructure provisioning. So this node is coming from DHCP, right? And so DHCP assigned this IP here, but this IP will pretty much stay the same. It won't change. And you can see there is my host address, my primary address. You can see here, and then the next. So this is the host address, and then I want the host subnet. So this is the host subnet. That's really important. Why the host subnet? Because that's where the pods are, right? That's the pod IP. In this instance here, we're not using node port. There's no reason to use node port. To be really honest with you, connect directly to the pod. Since Big IP has integration to the pod, don't use node port, right? Use cluster IP. You can use cluster IP. You don't require a tunnel. Just create 3 static routes and you're finished. So here is my node subnet, 10.129.2/23, 10.131.0, and 10.128. These are the static routes that I need. So this is really important. These are the static routes that I need, right? The 3 subnets. So those are the routes that I need. So now what I can do is I can take this information and create my static routes. So let's look at the static route. So the static route on BigIP, I'm going to use TMSH net route, is the node subnet and the node IP. So it's basically saying that if you want to go to this specific subnet, you just go to that node and it will route it for you. It's pretty cool, actually. I mean, this is standard routing. Just think of it as a downstream router. It's really all it is. You need to get the routing interfaces so that we can basically say this subnet here is the destination. The destination is the node itself, and this is the subnet. And so if I had 2 big IPs, these would be exactly the same. So we can go look at big IP, and we can go down to network, and we can take a look at the routes, and you can actually see here are the routes. There's 128, 129, 131, and you can kind of see here are the addresses. And so let's look at my pods. So if I go to my workload and take a look at my pods, you can let's see. I've got a couple pods here. Let's click on this pod, and let's see where the IP address is. See that? 131. So that is the pod IP, 10.131.0.118, and that is right there. So big IP has a route to that pod, and so that route is there. So big IP ultimately should be able to ping that. And that's it. There's the pod. So let's take a look if there are a networking. No ingress. In this case, it's a route, but it's ingress. So I don't want to get confused. These are network static routes that are on big IP. That's going to route traffic into the cluster. Once the traffic gets to OpenShift, it has an internal routes, which is an OpenShift routes, that basically ingresses the traffic. And so we'll create that in a second. So that is in this case, I've got 3 nodes. That's the 3 routes that you need. So here are the routes. Now what I'm going to do is we have to do one other thing. We have to create in the namespace, it's the namespace, we have to specify this annotation. And this is for OVN-Kubernetes routes. This is for routing external gateways. So this is your response traffic. And this is the self IP of the big IP. And this is a standalone. So if we go look at the big IP self IPs, we can see here that that is my, it is my external address. It's this address right here. That's where my cluster is. So this is the IP address that I need to forward traffic back from. So send traffic back here so that big IP can basically send it back to the client. Don't send it back to the client directly. And so that's really important. So 125.60, that is my self IP. Now, if I was using HA, that'd be a floating address. And that's all you have to do. But wait until the next video. It'll come out this week. So let's go ahead and create some routes. So to create the routes, I've just created 3 routes: Cafe Mocha, Cafe Coffee, and Cafe Tea. It's very simple routes. You can actually see the routes were created right here. So there is the first route, second route, just three very, very, very simple routes. Let's go and open. You can see here I just connected to, let's refresh this. So here I just connected to coffee. There is coffee. And here I connected, let's go and connect to Mocha. Open in a new tab. There we go, there's Mocha. So there is coffee, there's Mocha, and this is tea. So here's the three routes. And so those are refreshing there. And we are connecting to these 3 routes. Very simple routes. So I can show you what the routes look like. So once you've created that, you can obviously connect to those routes. So quick note on deploying CIS. So what do you notice here that's different? Well, there's no OpenShift information. So since there's no OpenShift information, there's no FTP update, there's no static ARP update. Basically, OpenShift is very quiet. There's nothing really going on in OpenShift. There's no updates. For example, it's very, 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 very quiet, which I really actually like. Let's see if I can just get this log here. Get pod. Let's see. Come on, where are you? Change so many directories. There we go. Oh, no, updates. Oh, maybe it's not here. Okay, let's log it. It's not here. Okay. I don't have the name of the pod, but I can show you. And if you look at the logs, I can get it. Well, let's look here at the name of CIS. So we'll go CIS. We'll change to kube system. And there is the deployment, and it's called, this will work. We can just log it based on here. So we can do OC logs -f, the name of the pod, -n, and we can say kube-system. And it's been running for a few days, so you're going to get all the logs. Yep, I should have grabbed the logs. But, you know, system's really quiet. Nothing going on. Just some successful load balancing there. This is debug logs that are coming from loaded configuration file. But this is it. There's no FTP information updates. You're not seeing everything in the logs every 30 seconds like you are with Flannel. And the reason for that is because here you just got informers. We're just listening for an API change. That's it. And this is debug. If I wasn't doing debug, if I turned the debug log off, which is recommended, you would get nothing. So turn debug off. This is just debug logging to see if there's any changes. But you can see there's nothing in here, no FTP, no ARP update, like you would see if you're using Flannel. So with CIS deployment, basically very simple. Username and password, big IP, the OpenShift partition on big IP, potentially the namespace. This namespace here, it's actually cafe. Let me go take a look at the GitHub repo. Let's go directly to the GitHub repo. So here is my GitHub repo. Let's pull this configuration. You can see right here. There we go. Namespace coffee. And because I'm using next-gen routes, now we're working really hard to completely revamp our routes. So it's a completely new design. It's almost based on the same framework as CRDs. So the performance is going to be so much better. Next-gen routes, think of it as like a CRD, where within next-gen routes, you can have multiple routes use a unique virtual IP address. So it's not like legacy routes. So next-gen routes is like the way to go. We're working on it. So I'd highly recommend you take a look at that. And so in this example here, I'm using next-gen routes. With next-gen routes, there's a config map or a base config map. And so that's what I've done. I don't want to make this discussion here about next-gen routes, but because I've already made a video on that, and I will create another video. So deploy CIS. CIS is running. Here's my next-gen route. This is my global config map. My route IP address. This is the virtual IP. This virtual IP is actually configured in the config map. So that's how you're doing it. So you can have multiple extended route spec, and you can have as many virtual addresses as you want. Here I create 65, you create 66, 67. You can assign it a virtual namespace. So the goal here is to tie as much stuff into the config map that you would do from a networking perspective. Think of it as more of a NetOps administrator configuration, like virtual IP, potentially some policy work. And then you can create that config map, and then you wouldn't have to worry about it. But that's basically how you get your public IP. Because it used to be, we used to create this in the CIS arguments. But now in the CIS arguments, there's no there is no virtual IP address anymore. It's all created in the config map. So it's down to the config map level. So if I go back to my big IP, go to my local traffic, you can see there is the. Now, if I wanted to create Cafe New or a different namespace and a different public IP, I could easily do that, right? All I would do is just add an additional piece to here, right? You would just create a new namespace, new virtual IP, and then assign routes to that, and off you go. That's the goal here. Now, in this up-and-coming release of CIS 2.11, we are allowing a policy CRD to be added to your config map. And that's really cool, because in a policy CRD, you can pretty much change, manipulate an HTTP policy, TCP policy, WAF, DOS, bot, lots of other cool things. Right? So that's coming, and I'll create a demo on that. So here's my 3 routes that I created. You can see the virtual IP. I'm using TLS certificates, and so you can actually see here is the 3 routes. If we take a look at the route, let's take a look at the route quickly. Here's the route repo. Let's look at this. And very, very, very simple route. There's just my path and my target port. So I'm doing edge. Yep, I'm embedding the cert. This you can use a secret, or you can use a TLS profile on Big IP. But again, this is just a simple demo, not about the routes, but more about the improvement in the architecture. So let's go back to this demo, and you can see that the traffic is still going. So let's take a look at the diagram. So again, just to recap, this video is how to use Big IP with CIS with OVN-Kubernetes for OpenShift. This is OpenShift 4.11, no tunnels. So what I'm basically doing here is Big IP is simply just routing to the gateway, which then routes you to the pod, which is fully automated by CIS. And I have this annotation here to support egress gateways. This is 192.125.60. This is my self IP on Big IP. That's it. That's the demo. It's pretty simple. Documentation is going to be changed for CIS 2.11 release. For 2.11 for CIS, which is going to come probably around the middle of November. I've started to do some planning for the up and coming 6 months. Start doing some other cool demos. Haven't had much time to do YouTube. I do apologize. So busy with next generation Big IP. However, I do promise to add a whole bunch of more content. I've got so much content to publish. But I wanted to publish this one because I've just finished working on this integration and working hard with Red Hat to bring this information to you. So if you like this video, if you like this content, please give a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I want to try and grow my subscriber base. And please share this video and provide some comments. Thank you very much.